Hello and welcome to the Memory Card. 2017 has been one insane year for games. There's been so many amazing games coming out this year. In fact, I had to pry myself away from Super Mario Odyssey just to film this review. But regardless of how many big, awesome games have been coming out, and even more are coming out in November, I'm going to be dedicating the month of November to my favorite game series of all time, The Legend of Zelda. As you might be able to tell by how often I wear this Hylian crest hat and Zelda shirts in general, I'm a huge fan of the franchise. In fact, the Zelda series actually not only got me back in Nintendo, and made me more of a Nintendo fan than I'd ever been in my life, but back into modern games in general, which is kind of ironic because the game that actually did that for me was a GameCube remake. But it's hard to deny how much I love this game. And the Wii U actually had a couple of HD remasters of Zelda games before Breath of the Wild came out, and even though it came out on the Switch as well, and most people, including myself, think of it more as a Switch game than a Wii U game. Regardless, the game that kicked off those remasters is, in my opinion, the best of the remasters on the system, and it's none other than Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker HD for the Nintendo Wii U. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker HD came out in 2013, 11 years after the release of the original GameCube game. Zelda games tend to release to nearly unanimous critical and fan praise, but The Wind Waker originally set sail on tumultuous waves of harsh criticism from fans and critics alike before its release, for some of the dumbest reasons possible. People thought its art style was too kiddish and not serious and gritty enough for them. It was derided as The Legend of Zelda because of its cel-shaded graphic style and how cartoonish it was. The sad thing is, what people criticize it for the most ended up being what helped make it such an enduring classic. In fact, I remember being one of those dumb kids back in the day that saw the art style on a preview from X-Play and thought it looked too kiddish for me. I was too busy playing games on my PS2 and Xbox and being on my high horse, even though I actively watched cartoons all the time at that point. Sometimes people just make no sense. Thankfully, when Wind Waker released, fans and critics realized just how amazing the game was, and now it's often considered one of the best games in the Zelda franchise, as it should be. Ironically, the art style which it was initially ridiculed for is now one of its most praised aspects. The art style, once thought too kiddish and below the critics and fans at the time, is now regarded as one of the most timeless and beautiful art styles ever put in a video game. Now, 11 years later, Wind Waker was re-released in HD with some notable improvements, and that signature art style looks even better and brighter than it ever did thanks to the new lighting and other graphical improvements. And the art style is even more notable now than it was back in the GameCube days. Now I've said that the tail end of the Xbox 360 and PS3's lifespans pretty much burnt me out on AAA games and modern games in general. I was so sick of the never-ending slog of brown, gray, quote-unquote realistic-looking games that focus more on trying to appease to the hardcore and pretend to be movies rather than fun and unique games. The Wii U changed that for me and got me back into modern games in a big way and brought me back to Nintendo after about a decade away. Splatoon, Bayonetta 2, and Pikmin 3, among many other games, are what sold me on the Wii U, but the biggest reason I hoisted my sails and embarked on a journey back into video games, new and old, was because of the Wind Waker HD. In a sea of boring, samey games, Wind Waker HD stood out with its beautiful, bold, and bright colors, and overwhelming sense of fun, personality, and charm. But my favorite things to look for in any form of fiction, regardless of the medium, is a sense of adventure, fun and interesting characters, and a story I can care about. And in visual mediums, that art style being distinctive also helps quite a bit, and a sense of discovery as well. The Wind Waker hits every single one of those assets with style to boot. Now, its story isn't really going to rival the Mass Effect trilogy or Star Wars Knights of the Republic or The Witcher 3, but it's enough for a classic adventure story. It's one of my favorites in the Zelda series, largely because of the world, the characters that inhabit it, and the characterizations of Link and Zelda. A lot of times Link is justifiably said to not really be a character, but more just a vehicle between the player and the land of Hyrule. For one thing, this game stood out because it was the second Zelda game in a row to not really take place in Hyrule. Link is sailing the vast Great Sea, looking for his sister that was kidnapped. It's a simple setup, but the way Link is characterized, and the way his personality comes to life, makes this version of Link my favorite Nintendo character. He's brash and impulsive, but he's courageous and is determined to rescue his sister that he loves dearly. And he has a grandmother that raised him, and he cares for her as well, and he's gone off to save his sister not only because of his attachment to his sister and for her safety, but also for his grandmother because she's grieving the loss of her granddaughter. This Link isn't setting off on his journey because he's destined to be the hero of Hyrule or because he has to. He earns the right to be a hero and chooses to be a hero. And he only really saves the day because he feels he needs to after saving his sister to make sure that no one else gets kidnapped or threatened by the evil forces threatening the Great Sea ever again. He is selfless and chooses to be a hero. He isn't forced to, and that's one of the biggest reasons why this incarnation of Link is my favorite. One of the biggest advantages of this art style is how expressive it allows the characters to be in this game and helps bring this world to life. Link is visibly disappointed when he gets the tunic of the hero because he thinks it looks lame. You get to see his anger when his sister is taken, and then the fear and courage that takes over him when he goes to the Forsaken Fortress to try and save her. And all the other little moments throughout the game as well. It only adds to the charm and overall likability of this game and the characters within it. But it also helps make Link more enjoyable and relatable because you get to see his reactions and his personality shine through. Those reasons and more are why I don't think it's remotely fair or accurate to say that this incarnation of Link is just a blank slate with no character of his own. It would be a crime if I did a review of this or any other Zelda game, really, and failed to mention the fantastic music that helps define the franchise. Koji Kondo, my favorite composer in all of video games, did the music for a lot of Nintendo's main franchises, including The Legend of Zelda. He worked alongside other composers to create the phenomenal music for The Wind Waker, and the soundtrack of this game belongs in the uppermost echelon of game soundtracks. It perfectly captures the setting and atmosphere of the game, and often incorporates franchise-defining melodies in inventive new ways that is unique to The Wind Waker. Just about every track in this game is one that I'll always have in my head and utterly adore. For instance, the music for Outset Island, The Great Sea, Windfall Island, and Dragon Roost Island are especially amazing. In fact, the music for The Great Sea is one of the biggest reasons why I love sailing in this game. It's so triumphant and heroic. This game, alongside Twilight Princess HD, has some of the best Wii U Gamepad integration in the entire system's library. Having the map and inventory always available on the Gamepad screen makes switching items and checking the map more seamless than ever before. It also makes sailing much easier because you don't have to pause to check the map while you're sailing or to switch items. And also, thankfully, the sail isn't an item you equip from your inventory in this version, which is a great subtle improvement. And that also helps make this the definitive version of this game. Not having to pause to switch items also means that you're never taken away from the game, which is great. Also, the gyro aiming, which you can turn off, is one of the best implementations alongside Splatoon and the Metroid Prime games on the Wii. Gyro aiming with the Wii U Gamepad, the Switch, or the Wiimote is by far my favorite way to aim in a console game. It's infinitely more precise and nuanced than aiming with dual analog sticks. Motion aiming and pointer aiming is as close as I think a console game can ever get to the precision of aiming with a mouse. Now, Wind Waker is often criticized for being the easiest of the 3D Zelda games and having the fewest dungeons alongside Majora's Mask. Wind Waker HD does add a hero mode after you beat the game the first time, so there is a more challenging mode for veteran Zelda players. But honestly, games don't have to be NES hard for me to like them. I don't play games to be beat over the head with difficulty. I just want to play a game and have fun and have it take me to places in ways other media just doesn't do for me. Wind Waker HD does that for me, and there was never a time during my many playthroughs of this game where I wished it was more difficult. Also, the game having fewer dungeons doesn't bother me at all because honestly, the dungeons are not my favorite part of Zelda games. It's exploring the world. I love dungeons, and they can feature some of the most inventive and interesting design in Zelda games, but what I want to spend hours doing is getting lost in a game's world, and what I remember the most are the characters and locations and quests I find as I explore the world. Wind Waker's Great Sea is one of my favorite places to explore in any video game. There's so much variety and so many interesting characters and locations among the islands, and the sailing is really fun to me. One of the other great ironies of the Wind Waker is that, despite people saying that it's the most kiddie Zelda game, it has one of the most epic and violent final boss fights in a Zelda game. The amount of sailing does rub some people the wrong way, but thankfully Wind Waker HD adds a fast sail that you can win in an auction in-game, and it makes sailing much easier and faster. Also, the end game of the original release did bug people because it's a bit long in the tooth, but Wind Waker HD addresses that and streamlines things, and it's very much appreciated. But regardless of whether I had the fast sail or not, the sailing never bothered me, because there's always so much to do while you sail. There's buried treasure to find, islands, forts, and other vessels to stop at, enemies to fight, and in Wind Waker HD, there's also the tingle bottles to find from Miiverse posts from other sailors of the Great Sea. Unfortunately, since Miiverse is closing soon, at the time of this recording, so that won't really be the case anymore. Even without the tingle bottles, though, there is plenty to see and do while sailing, so that never bothered me. Also, there's a fair amount of people that really don't like Tingle, but I really enjoy the character. I played this game before Majora's Mask, so this was actually my first exposure to the character. For similar reasons as Waluigi, I love Tingle because he is so weird and goofy. He further adds to the colorful world of the Wind Waker, even with his sinister undertones that makes him even more interesting in this version. And speaking of Tingle, one of the other main reasons I love Zelda games are all the weird and interesting characters that fill these games. Tingle is one of the most memorable characters in the franchise, but the Wind Waker in general has some of the most memorable characters and designs in the Zelda franchise, partially because of the expressive art style. Some of my favorites are the Koroks. They remind me of the forest spirits from Princess Mononoke. They also provide some interesting ties to Ocarina of Time, alongside just having really interesting designs. They straddle the line between adorable and creepy in a really interesting, fun way. Though for me, I think they're pretty cute. There's also the residents of Windfall Island, which are all unique, but some of them are kind of annoying. The main one being this disheveled man that always harasses you every time he sees you, and he's honestly one of my least favorite characters in the franchise. Every single time he sees you, no matter how many times you listen to his crap, he always runs over and interrupts what you're doing to talk to you and say the same thing over and over again. So now I just avoid that character every chance I get. The Wind Waker has one of the more interesting companion characters, and some great allies as well. The King of Red Lions, the boat that Link sails around in, has a fantastic design. However, what's mostly interesting about him, alongside that design, is the mild twist of his history. Other than that, his personality isn't really all that complex, but it is still more interesting than Navi. But Medley and Makar the Korok are some of my favorite characters in the franchise. Medley is especially endearing because of her compassion and desire to be the best she can be and generally help those around her. She's very selfless, kind of like Link is, but less brash. Despite the shortcomings she sees in herself, she still does whatever she can to help Link save the world, and her flying mechanic is fun and leads to some interesting puzzle designs in the dungeons that she's in. And also, I love Makar's design, and his tree planting ability is pretty fun because it adds some wrinkles to the design of dungeons and puzzles that he's involved with. He's also similar to Medley in the fact that Link's mission helps give his life more purpose and meaning and drive. Wind Waker HD is one of the best HD remasters ever done, because it takes an already fantastic game and fixes the only minor problems I had with the game to make this a near perfect release. It's a shame that one of the best games ever made is locked to two of Nintendo's least successful systems, both of which are some of my favorite consoles. And that sucks because that means that far too few people have played this masterpiece. Wind Waker HD not only meets all the insane expectations put upon each mainline Zelda game, but it exceeds them. There are few games that exude the childlike sense of fun and adventure than the Wind Waker HD. Reggie Fils-Aimé from Nintendo said that the goal of Nintendo was to make players feel younger than they actually are, and there are few games for me that achieve that greater than The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker HD. It's an amazing must-play game, and in my opinion, this is easily the best version of the game. And it's one of the best games that I have or will ever play, and the Gamepad integration of this makes this one of the standout releases of the Wii U's library. And for a long time, this was my favorite Legend of Zelda game, and I didn't think it would be possible for that to be topped. But there was a game that came out that I played that managed to do that. But we'll get to that another time. And regardless, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on the memory card where we continue Zelda Month.